teams that were being set up across the schools, and the No Place for Hate framework in APS. In March, we heard from Shari Lyons on anti-racism and how to support children against racism. In April, from Ryoko Reed on equity-focused data and transforming data into action. In June, from Samia Bird on the County Equity Toolkit, and also from Whitney Kernoodle, who had been to the partnership meeting once before, on some of the work of the Black Parents Alliance, or Black Parents of Arlington. And specifically, Whitney talked about a report card that the Black Parents of Arlington put together based on publicly available data that was truly alarming for us to consider all sitting down in that meeting. And based on statistics, which is a real specialty of this partnership, looked at learning gaps and equity gaps across the county, and told us that one of the priorities of the Black Parents of Arlington will be to focus on early reading so that children do better in reading by 3rd grade, so that they can go from learning to read to reading to learn. And so I wanted to turn to John, who joined for a planning and development meeting, I think it was last week, but also has shared by email some of his thoughts following up on that meeting, to kick off our discussion tonight before Lynn introduces our guests.
Thanks, Megan. Whitney Kernoodle's concern about 3rd grade reading SOLs, when we talked about it at the P&D meeting, we realized that the SOLs are snapshots of a point in time, and they're after the fact. So we asked ourselves, what should we do to look at the circumstances that lead up to that? Who are the players that influence those children from birth to 3rd grade? And what might they do to improve the outlook for those children's lives? And I guess I would comment that kids are learning from the day they're born, and they continue to do that the rest of their life. They explore their world, fingers and toes and things that break. They climb over things they shouldn't. They mimic people, including older siblings, parents, caregivers. At some point, they wind up with some intentional education, and that's preschools and formal education. Excuse me. So if they don't read well by 3rd grade, think of the number of people that were in their lives from birth till then. Parents, siblings, caregivers, teachers, whatever it might be, neighbors. And the question for the partnership, I think, is what might any of those people or institutions do differently or in addition that might change the prospect of this child's future? The reason I think this falls to the partnership to look at, I went back to look at some early papers. I said I was on the partnership forever. The original charge from the county was to develop a community vision, and community, I think, is a key piece, to meet the needs of children, youth, and families using data, analysis, collaboration. That's what we're doing tonight, is collaboration, and advocacy. So we're charged to look at the community as a community, and I think we can look at any of these players. There are resources that help kids. We'll hear from a few tonight. There are caregivers that are quite untrained, and there are schools. So we can look at all those institutions over time, or we can consider it at least, and think about what might be different to make the children's lives different. Outcome better.
All right. Thank you, John. And I particularly am appreciative of our conversation that we had in the P&D meeting last week, John and Megan, and that kind of gave us some directions for this meeting and next month's meeting. I really appreciate that and would encourage more of us to join that meeting. It will be a monthly meeting that will include, a planning and development, but also compressing, that data subcommittee meeting into that group as well. So I hope that we pick up momentum with that, because that, I think, is one of the critical, it serves a critical function of moving us and maximizing our time in this meeting, that developing a lot of the planning and directions before we jump into this Wednesday meeting. So yeah, so before I'm gonna admit another person here. Yeah, so we quickly thought of, okay, who can we invite? And we immediately thought of, county, Arlington, DHS, connected folks, also APS, and the big folks who we know are doing this work of, identifying needs, providing services, support for children. And we loosely term it as preschool age. So we thought of PI, and Kristen Yates is here. Kristen, introduce herself. Kristen is wonderful. She was able to, join us, collaborate with us in the May symposium. So Kristen did a wonderful workshop and talked about PI, and we received a lot of positive feedback, lots of information. And here we can have a special guest. Hi, Ann's baby. I'm sorry, I'm easily distracted by kids. But Kristen is here to speak with us. And then I'm not sure if you have a PowerPoint to put up, but you can also freely talk about, PI. And then we'll go for about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll transition to Kathleen. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds great. Hi, everyone. Like Lynn said, I'm Kristen Yates. I am the social worker for our early intervention program here in Arlington. And I don't have a PowerPoint, but I did want to maybe start with a video that our state early intervention office puts out that just describes a general overview of what early intervention is, what we do, who we are. So I'm not sure what's going to be easiest, if Sally, maybe you want to make me a co-host, or if I just send you the link really quick to share your screen. I'm happy to do whatever's easiest there.
Okay, I can do both. You're a co-host now and you want to shoot me a link, that's totally great.
Let's see if I can, if I'm a co-host, I'll just go ahead and share my screen then. All right, so I'll kick us off with this just to give a broader background of what early intervention is, what it looks like in Virginia, before I talk specifically about what we do in Arlington.
Early intervention is a system of supports and services for families with infants and toddlers ages birth to 3 that have developmental delays or disabilities.
Early intervention, I would explain that as being a program that provides services to children and their families to empower them and give them the skills and strategies that they need so that their child can reach their fullest potential.
It is daunting when you're told that your son or daughter is behind or has a disability, because you might not even know it. Like in our case, we didn't have any clue until we went to the doctor's visit and he wasn't meeting all of the marks he should have. But I'm so glad I didn't let my pride get in the way of my child receiving these amazing services.
When I talk to families and I talk about early intervention, I think the main thing that I want them to understand is that our purpose is to help them as a family be able to participate in things that are important to them. Because to me, that's what early intervention is.
It is helping a child do something that's important to the family. It's helping a child to be part of the family and do the things that the family wants to do.
All we are there to do is to help the parent shine. It's our job to make sure that they know what they're doing is helping their child.
An early interventionist is going to come in and collaborate and support parents and guardians or grandparents and aunts and uncles to identify things in the environment that those folks are already doing well and help them enhance the environment that much more to promote optimal brain development. So you're not going to be told what to do. because that's really not the business. We're not in the business to tell parents what to do. We're in the business to tell parents, you're already doing great things. Here's some things you can do to push that development even further along the spectrum.
What a gift to have someone you can relay information with. We all have times where we're like, am I doing this right? Especially as a new parent, am I on the right road? Should I be doing this? And to have someone weekly telling you, yes, this is good. No, maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe you should try this. Gosh, that's such a gift.
I have yet to run into a family who did not leave the program feeling excited and confident in what their child is able to do. Even if it didn't follow the course that they thought it would, they're in a better place now than they were when we first started working together. And you know what? At the end of the day, that's what matters.
Early intervention typically looks like whatever the family's doing or whatever is important to the family. So it might look a little bit different based on the family's needs or concerns or what they're doing throughout their day.
I mean, as soon as Jen walks in the door, I cannot wait to talk to her. I have a million questions bombarding to her, and she typically asks me, like, what has been going on that week? What has been not working? What has been working? Have we made any developments? And then if there anything isn't working, then we adjust. And if there's any new developments, we obviously celebrate those.
It is more of a hands-on approach with the family in their daily routine. So if a child is having a hard time with feeding, then we're in there at their regular feeding time, eating their regular foods, and really getting to look at what mom and dad are doing, and then from there moving towards some ideas of what we can do to meet that goal.
I bring the knowledge and skills and the experiences that I've went through or that I've learned into the home, but I'm not the only expert. The parent is the expert as well. The parent knows the child more than I do, so basically we're building off each other.
But it's basically just Julie hanging out with Caitlin, doing things and focusing on certain aspects, trying to get her to make sounds that she wouldn't normally do, talking with me or Carrie about what's happened in the last week, what we can do.
It is very important for the family to let us know what their concerns are, what their issues are, what is affecting them, what is working and what isn't working. So they are a very critical piece in the process.
As a parent, we worry about whether we're doing it right, and then we worry about what we have to pay for or invest money in to get it correct, or to provide the best environment for our child. And what parents often don't understand is that it's part of everyday life, it's part of your everyday routine. And so helping parents see that bath time, going to the grocery store, walking down the driveway, going to get the mail, these are all things that allow us to provide those experiences for children that matter a lot.
Early intervention works because, number one, we're working with the family. We're not just working with the child, we're working with the family as a whole. We're also working in the child's natural environment. So we're working in a place where the child is comfortable.
When you go into natural environments, whether it's someone's home, and a lot of times it is a home because we're working with young children and that's where they are, you're going into their space. And so you're developing a relationship with a family that is, it's very special.
I think early intervention works because we're step-by-step teaching and coaching and helping parents learn to interact with their children.
There are people who care just as much about your child as you do. There are therapists, there are social workers, and they are right there for you. And they want your child to succeed just as much as you do.
And so I think between the relationship and doing everyday activities with them, talking to them about things that are important to them, I think that's why it works.
Early intervention works on several levels. It works because it's early. We know the sooner that an intervention can be provided for a child that's experiencing a developmental delay, the better chance we have to impact and help that child.
During the first years of life, our brain adds about 700 connections per second. And these connections are a result of the interaction between genetics and an environment. And so what happens in the environment strongly influences how those connections are set up. And so these connections lay the foundation for later learning in math, science, reading, social studies, dance, the arts. And it's like building a house. You want to lay the foundation first, and you have to have a strong foundation if you want the house to last for an extended period of time. And early intervention ensures that all children get the same start and have the same opportunities. And this is important. It is an investment for a community. It's an investment for society. And the most amazing part of it is all the data suggests that we get a return on our investment. The payoff is much greater if we take care of it right now when they're young and their brains are highly malleable than if we wait.
So that's the big picture view of who we are and what we do. So early intervention comes out of the same bill, the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, as special education does. We work with kiddos from birth up until the day before their third birthday. We're a voluntary program. As you can tell from the video, we're very family focused, family centric. Parents truly are the experts in their kids, and we are there to help support them and support their child's development. So in order to get services through us, in order to be seen, you've got to, your child has to be between 0 and 3. You've got to live in Arlington for our program, although it is a federal program. So every state has its version of early intervention. Every county in Virginia has its own EI system. And in order to qualify for services, your child has to be showing a delay in one or more areas of development of at least 25%, or something atypical in their developmental patterns, or have a medical condition that we know has a strong probability of causing or a developmental delay or impacting their development. And I'll say one thing that we in Arlington do that is not necessarily statewide at this point is that we recognize the formation of a secure bond between child and caregiver as a developmental domain. So when we see things like kids who are in foster care, kids who have experienced abuse or neglect, we qualify those as quote unquote medical conditions, but conditions that we know have a strong probability of affecting development, and will provide support to those kiddos. And at any point, if you've got questions, stop me, please. So we are working, we are, like I said, a community-based program, a family-based program. As you saw in the video, we will meet with families in their child's natural environment. Of course, with COVID, it's been a little bit different because we've been virtual, but we will meet with families wherever they would normally be during that visit time and help parents figure out ways to support their child's development to work towards their goals. So the services that we offer, we've got speech and language pathologists on board, occupational therapists, physical therapists, special educators or developmental therapists. We've got a vision specialist who we work with, a nutritionist. I'm our mental health clinician who works with our little guys and their families. And so those are kind of the types of services that we provide. We use a parent coaching model. So we're not going in there and, our PTs aren't going in there and doing exercises with the little kids. We're not trying to get babies to do squats or anything like that. We're doing everything in a functional basis and using the parent as the instrument of change, because that's what the research shows us, is that when you look at these therapies for young kids, an hour a week with a professional does not make a ton of difference. And there's really no difference between like 1 hour and 3 or 4 hours a week of therapy when you're this young, because babies and toddlers are really not great at generalizing what they learn to other environments. And so what we know is that when parents feel empowered and parents know what to do, what they can do to support their kiddos to move towards those goals, then the baby gets to practice over and over and over again throughout their normal routine. And that's how we see more progress. So we really do and I know this is a cliche, but we really do meet families where they are and join with parents and caregivers to help them figure out ways to enhance what they're already doing. And ways to use things that they're already part of their daily routine, things they already have in their house, to go ahead and help their kiddo move forwards and move towards whatever the goals are on that child's service plan. Let me see. And so we sometimes get the question when parents are calling us, what happens when my kid turns 3? Because that's a pretty hard cutoff. And I'm glad Kathleen's here because you're going to be able to take over for that. But our primary source, if kids are still in need of services once they are getting closer to 3, is a referral to the special education system. And so going through Child Find to see if they are eligible for any sort of assistive or supportive or supports through the Office of Special Education. The other place that we will sometimes refer kids is, sometimes parents will choose to continue with a private therapist, a private PT or OT or speech therapist. If it's a kiddo who I'm seeing for mental health services, we'll often refer to a private therapist or to our county's Division of Child, Youth and Families, our Behavioral Health Bureau in our Child and Family Services Division. So as far as how is this program funded? Yeah. So it is a federal mandate. We rely mostly on state and local funding. The program in Virginia is not free to families. So we do bill your kiddo's insurance. Now, that said, we'll bill insurance. Whatever insurance doesn't cover, parents are responsible for, but we do have a sliding fee scale that relies on the family's taxable income to figure out what your max out of pocket would be in any given month. Any kiddo with Medicaid is covered completely. Medicaid covers all of our services, but honestly, the fees that we collect is a pretty minimal portion of the program funding. The majority of that is state and local dollars. Do I think funding is meeting our needs? I would kick that question more to our program supervisor. Our caseloads are a bit high right now. It wouldn't be a bad thing to have other, additional staff members. Never is, right? But that question is slightly above my pay grade. And then our underserved communities in Arlington. So that's an interesting question. We have done a little bit of work in identifying, and this is data that's still in progress. I don't have any definitive answers for you there. But we do see that kids with Medicaid are slightly overrepresented compared to child poverty rates in Arlington. So kids who are referred to us, we've got a slight overrepresentation of kids with Medicaid. Whether that's because kids with private insurance tend to go to a private PT as opposed to calling the county, possible. Whether that's because we know that living in poverty there are other social indicators of health or social determinants of health that could be impacting that child, also possible. Our team is focused, and there's been both a top-down and a bottom-up perspective on this as far as issues of racial equity and kind of acknowledging the fact that our system sits at the intersection of schools, healthcare, and social services. And all of those systems have their own issues when it comes to race and equity. And so we have been following both the county's leadership on working on the initiatives that have come down countywide and DHS-wide, as well as doing some of our own digging into our numbers and just taking a look at who are we seeing, what are we seeing here? What patterns are we noticing? That's the piece that is still in progress, that data analysis part. We do about a third of our staff are fully bilingual Spanish-speaking clinicians or service coordinators, with a good number of those being bicultural as well, which is helpful. Unfortunately, English and Spanish are the only native languages that we've got represented in our staff. So we are reliant on interpretation agencies for families who speak another language or whose primary language is something else. Interpretation is great. I rely on it a lot. It is also not the same, right, as having a clinician or having a therapist who speaks your native language. And then we've got to a wide, because kids who have certain medical conditions are automatically eligible for our program, we have a lot of medically complex and fragile kiddos who we see. So we definitely see an overrepresentation of kids who have more complicated medical needs that are getting in the way of their diagnosis, or if their development, excuse me. So some of our automatic qualifying conditions are things like if you were born before 28 weeks of gestation, if you spent more than 28 days in the NICU after you were born, any sort of hearing loss, or concerns around, vision, what else? Cleft palate, cleft lip, lots of different chromosomal disorders, conditions like that we know there's a strong link between that and concerns around development. We see an overrepresentation of medically fragile kids in our program because of that, partly because that's what we're designed for. That's who we're there to support. Yeah, I am trying to think if I'm missing anything, so please feel free to hit me with any other questions, but I think we've covered, the basic overview.
Any questions or comments for Kristen? Well, I have a comment, maybe a little bit of a question. Is the comment is that I'm very enthused and encouraged to hear the many tiers and levels and layers of consideration that you have in your programming that are equity focused, and seems like there's a healthy dosage of trauma-informed care, including exposure to trauma as an automatic eligibility, because from what we know about ACEs, adverse childhood experience, we know the impact, and it looks like that, your programming, your criteria of assessment incorporates all of that. And I'm also glad to hear that you are, addressing equity directly and intentionally, and it is a process for DHS. We're not just looking at who's better, is anyone better off, but who's better off, right? So it sounds like you have a very robust kind of look at that. My question then is that, despite all those great efforts, do you still see areas of the community or sectors of the community that may need their services and are not getting to their services? And who are they? And what are some recommendations that you have that you're looking to strive towards?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do a lot of outreach with and work with our local pediatricians because they are by far our biggest referral source. Kids, in large part, thanks to, expansion of health insurance options, most kids in the community do see a pediatrician at least somewhat regularly, which is awesome. Because of that, we've been working really strongly with pediatricians to make sure that they've got a comprehensive view of child development and realistic expectations at every age level so that they can help identify when a child might not be meeting those milestones, while taking into consideration that culturally speaking, those milestones are different across cultures. So I could hand out the CDC milestone checklist, and that is very much based in Anglo-Western norms, and things look different cross-culturally. So we try to keep that in mind as well. There are always families who are harder to get in touch with when there are technology difficulties, especially during COVID. Not all families have been able to access telehealth, although thankfully our numbers of families who haven't been able to manage at least some form of telehealth have been surprisingly, for me, low. But of course, that's an impact. I think we do a decent job of removing a lot of those barriers during normal times because we're meeting the families where they are. We don't require them to come to the office. We actually encourage them not to. Because doing an assessment or seeing a child in the office, like I said before, doesn't give us a good idea of how that kiddo is functioning in his or her day-to-day world. I think there are certain groups in the community, of course, that are just more skeptical of government services and government intervention. And so we focus a lot on relationship building not only with our families, but also with some of our community partners. So daycare providers and pediatricians and the early Head Start staff and the staff at all of our community centers who provide like the Project Family staff. Other people who are in the infant and early childhood world to try to make sure that we're not missing, I have to acknowledge to myself, we're never going to be perfect on this. But we're trying to catch as many kids as we possibly can. And we are a voluntary program. And so even if a child's eligible, if a parent says, you know what, this is not the right fit for me, okay, that's fine. Again, you are the expert in your child. Call us back if you have concerns, if something comes up.
Right.
And I see Janetta, I think you've got your hand up.
Yeah, great presentation, by the way. Really like the information and the work that you're doing in the community. So I had a series of questions. One piece you answered, I was wondering, how you're getting, like what's your main referral source? It sounds like the pediatricians are. So a follow-up to that would be, how are you guys going about advertising, quote unquote, your services so that, Arlington's a very diverse, especially from a cultural standpoint, area. So how are you, one, just ensuring that enough pediatricians are kind of aware of who you are? And then two, for organizations, like I'm on the board for Bridges to Independence, where we run and maintain shelter for families as well. Has there been any outreach to like the shelters and other types of facilities in the county who also have staff who spend a lot of time with families with young children who could potentially refer to you as well? And the second question was related to, you mentioned that from a payment standpoint, you have kind of a sliding scale in place. Wondering to what extent any families have found your services to be cost prohibitive given the cost of living in the Arlington area. National poverty guidelines are very low compared to what poverty looks like in Arlington County. And then the third piece, I promise this is the last one, is related to, I'm wondering what your outcomes are for the kids. Like, do you guys have the ability, or have you been following the kids, pre-K into elementary school to really see what types of academic and or social outcomes that you guys are able to directly relate to the services that you've provided for the children?
Yeah, great questions, all of them. I am going to go backwards in the order that you asked. So as far as outcomes, I don't know that we have done longitudinal studies to track specifically our kids in Arlington. Over the years, the state definitely has and has measured some of those impacts, at least across these first 3 years. Onwards from that, statewide and recent, I am not sure. There's a pretty robust section of the literature that has indicated the benefits of early intervention, and that has tracked some of those kids directly from early intervention up until later school age. I think it was mentioned in that video, the return on investment that you get for dollars spent in EI. You'll hear different numbers. I've heard everything from, for every dollar you spend in EI, you save 5 to 15. And I've heard other numbers, but that seems to be the most consistent range. Down the road on things like mental health services, special education services, disability payments, things like that. So, as far as in Arlington specifically, I don't know that we ever have done more of that longitudinal study to take a look at specifically our kids and what they look like down the road. That would be an interesting one to do, kind of more hyper localized. As far as the cost, completely agree. Poverty in Arlington is a different dollar amount than poverty in other places, even within the state. So we use the sliding fee scale specifically done by our state office. One of the things that I appreciate about it is that it relies on taxable income, not overall income, or not gross income, which lowers that cost. And then if a family ever does say, hey, we cannot make this work, this is cost prohibitive, we have a fee appeal process where they sit down with my supervisor and she says, okay, what are you paying for childcare? We're deducting that from your monthly income. That doesn't count as income. What are you paying in rent? Okay, cool. We're taking that out. That doesn't count as income either. So that we really are trying to make some of those adjustments for cost of living in Arlington to make sure that it is not, that cost is never the reason why a family doesn't access our services. To my knowledge, it hasn't been. I have been with our program 6.5 years, so I can speak pretty confidently since about 2015. Prior to that, I'm not as sure, but there are a lot of different avenues to take into consideration the rest of family circumstances when we're figuring out what your out-of-pocket cost. And then as to outreach, yeah, so Bridges is wonderful. We've had some involvement with them. We had actually one of our service coordinators was the lead case manager through Bridges for one of our families a couple of years ago. So we probably could do better at doing outreach to the shelters. With the exception of doorways, I don't know that we're in consistent contact with anyone at the shelters. We work really closely, like I said before, with pediatricians, with Project Family, with our CPS and foster care friends over across the street in the other offices at Sequoia. And I think that's a good point about the shelters. That is not a population, or that is not an outreach effort that has been as consistent. And I'm not sure if this is what's chicken and what's egg here. I do know that we have not over the years, even when we've had families in the shelter, often having visits with a speech therapist or a physical therapist or engaging in our services might not be the family priority and might be too overwhelming in that moment when there's a lot of other stuff going on. We also know that kids living in a shelter is a condition, you know, that is something that could impact a child's development. Yeah. Does that answer those questions? What pieces did I miss as I was jotting down notes?
No, that was great. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for your robust answers to the wonderful questions that Janetta posed. And, you know, as you were talking, there's just a richness of information that I can imagine, you know, just Christine, you presenting for the whole meeting, right? There's just so much that we can talk about. So maybe we can make an open invitation here for both, you know, Kristen and Kathleen to return to us in the October meeting to kind of continue this conversation and to further, you know, do this brain dump, you know, which is our design to assess what's in, you know, what services we have and what's still needed. But in the interest of time, I like to move on, if I may, to Kathleen Donovan so that she can present on the Parent Resources Center. With that, I'll give the mic to you, Kathleen.
Okay, well, it's really nice to be here. I'm a big fan of the partnership, and I thank each of you for your work and for your advocacy on behalf of our children, youth, and families. I guess I'll go ahead and I think I should be able to share my screen. Let me get to this desktop. Okay. Bear with me for a sec. Okay, let me know when you all, can you see the full screen now that says Special Ed Parent Resource Center? Great. Okay, so I'll try to go through this quickly so we have a chance for some conversation. I won't move my computer because I'll throw my little presentation off, but I'm actually here in our Parent Resource Center, which you can see on the first slide, and I'm very grateful to have worked here for a number of years. Just structurally for Arlington Public Schools, the Parent Resource Center is technically a special education parent resource center. So we sit within the Office of Special Education. We have a small but dedicated team made up of myself, my new colleague Gina DeSalvo, and our wonderful bilingual administrative assistant Emma Peral. My background is both Gina and I are trained as special education teachers, and I started my career in Arlington as an elementary school teacher at Randolph and at Tuckahoe, worked as a kindergarten integration coordinator and then a child find coordinator. So many of the children that Kristen spoke with kind of came into child find, and I worked very closely with the PI program and with families of young children during my tenure in that position, prior to joining the team at the Parent Resource Center, where I've been for a number of years. Gina has also been a classroom teacher. She left Arlington for a short while to try out some administrative work in Fairfax County, happily decided to return to us, and she joined me just this fall. Her first day was in August, and Gina is here with me, and she's also pursuing a doctoral program at GW in special education with a focus on brain science and traumatic brain injury. So we're really grateful to have Gina with us. And Emma is here full-time and is a bilingual speaker, so she's able to work very closely with us with families who might speak Spanish. And we're located down the hall from the Language Services Registration Center. And of course, like many of the staff in our schools, we can use the language line to communicate with families who speak languages other than English or Spanish. So what is the Parent Resource Center? We frequently call ourselves the PRC. So if you hear that acronym, special education is filled with acronyms, and PRC stands for Parent Resource Center. And we're both a physical space here as well as a program with the goal of providing families with the information and support that they need to really advocate for their children and to become collaborative decision makers along with the teams at their children's school. And we also really focus a lot on promoting parent leadership. We know that the more engaged families are, the better the outcomes are for children. And I think we're very fortunate in Arlington to have a lot of parent leaders who've made great contributions to their children's education and to our work as a school district. So we work very closely with those folks, and I will tell you more about that a little bit later. So the PRC physically we were very excited to get back to our space this fall full time. So we are here every day, but we did find that there were a lot of silver linings for our families while we were working virtually. So we are going to kind of keep, even though we're here, we're going to keep the virtual PRC open, meaning that parents are most welcome to come in and schedule an appointment with us and browse the lending library that I'll tell you about a little bit. But also if it's easier for families to just call us on the phone, as we've always done, we'll continue to do that. Or if it's easier for families to video chat, we've had really good success with reaching families using those modalities. One great example was just earlier this week, we had a couple, a mother and father, and one of them was in the office and one of them was at home. And it was great because we had a virtual meeting, and, in previous years, only one of them probably would have been able to come. So we really want to continue to make this virtual option something that we can use to support families. And similarly, we do a lot of learning sessions, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those in a bit. But we're going to try to continue to, even when we have sessions in person, to offer a companion session virtually. At this point, probably more of our work will still be virtual for now, as far as trainings and learning sessions. So Arlington Public School also, as Krista mentioned, has a program called Child Find. So normally this slide would just say student support process, but I tweaked it a little bit to meet the needs to talk about how we work with our youngest learners. And typically what happens is when a staff member who maybe is working with one of our 3-year-olds or 4- or 5-year-olds in one of our pre-K programs, or a parent who might have a child at home in the community, or in a community-based preschool, or a child who's been in PI, the next step is if there's a concern about a child's developmental skills, social emotional skills, behavioral skills, anybody can refer a child to the Child Find program beginning the year that the child turns 2 by September 30th. So, I think that's why PI and Child Find work very closely together to ensure that any referrals are made within that window so that there's really no lapse in services. So should a parent choose to refer a child, the Parent Resource Center is a space that they can come to learn more about the process and what they can expect, how they can prepare for each meeting, and how they can really become an active member of their child's team and become a good advocate for their child. So just briefly, for those of you who might be unfamiliar with it, the Child Find process can happen at any point, technically until the age of 21. We usually refer to child find as ages 2 to 5, but all public school districts under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act have a mandate to find students with disabilities ages 2 through 21. So Arlington's first step is to have what we call a student support team meeting, and that student support team will meet and determine one of 3 outcomes. Most of the time when a student support team meeting happens through the pre-K to 5-year-old child find program, we're considering special education. But in the schools, just for older kids, just so everybody knows, some outcomes of a student support team might be creating an intervention plan where we decide we're going to do some very intensive work and interventions to address either academic, social, emotional, or behavioral concerns, take data on those interventions, and then come back, the family and the school team together, to see if things are going well and we're meeting the goals that we set for the child. Some students with a known disability that's adversely impacting their education might also qualify for something called a Section 504 plan. I won't get into that tonight because that's a whole separate, it actually sits within a civil rights law as opposed to education law, but I'm happy to come back. And I know Laura Newton is our kind of 504 coordinator, so I'd probably defer those questions to her. But then finally, the most common time when families are referring through child find for our little ones, we're considering special education processes. So there's a lot of steps in the special education process. We actually are going to be offering a class, I think on October 7th, just about the process. But in a nutshell, as I mentioned, anybody can make a referral to special education, for an evaluation. And at this point, once that referral is made, parents have decisions to make pretty much at every one of these colored sections of the wheel. And that's why we think it's so important that we are here to help families and make, it's so important that families have the information that they need to make, informed decisions and then hopefully provide informed consent. So for example, if Kristen referred a family to child find and the team decided they should do a special education evaluation, at that point, parents' permission is requested to conduct that evaluation. If the parent gives consent, an evaluation is conducted, and then a team would come back together to determine whether or not the child meets the criteria that the schools are required to use to find a child eligible. And a parent's consent is required to find that student eligible. If the parents agree, then the next step in the cycle down here, the individualized education program, is designed hopefully with strong parent input to really identify what are the child's strengths, what are their unique educational needs, and what services and supports. Once we identify the needs, we write goals, we talk about what accommodations are required, and then the team decides on what type of services are required from special education, what specialized instruction is required for that child to then be successful and make progress on their IEP goals. The IEP is revisited at least once every year. So the parent's consent is required to implement the first IEP, and then parent consent is required to make any changes to that plan. And then every 3 years, students have to be reevaluated. So parents are involved in making decisions about what new assessments might be needed every 3 years to determine if a child needs to be, if a child continues to be eligible. So I could tell you a lot more. We have a whole 2-hour class about the special ed process, but I point this out because these are very important decisions that parents are making. And, unless a parent just coincidentally happens to have a background in special education or school psychology, this is not often something that families are familiar with. So we're very grateful to have a chance to meet parents wherever they might be in this cycle and help them know what decisions are ahead of them, how they can prepare, how they can contribute and provide input to the team so that they become their child's advocate. So when we think about that process and we think about the family's roles in the child find process, I think the most important one is information sharers. We often tell parents, you're your child's narrator. You're the person who can tell your child's story. You are your child's first teacher. You are you know your child better than we do. Certainly for our little ones coming into Child Find, we don't know that child at all, but the parent has had this history to share. So families have a lot of insight, even for older kids. Students might show up in middle school or high school and might be having some concerns that might go unnoticed. And parents, though, are realizing that the child is taking 6 hours to do 2 or 3 assignments and they're in tears. So we always want families to be comfortable sharing what they know and informing the rest of the team. Families are members, they're legally required members of all of the teams that make these decisions in special education about a child. They are the lifelong advocate. We tell parents, you are the constant member of your child's team. As much as you might have amazing and dedicated staff, when your child leaves the PIE program and comes into the school district, there's some support in the transition, but the parent is the one member of the team that's still there. And similarly, as a child moves into elementary school and high school and middle school, families are the constant member of their child's team. So we really want them to be empowered and really think of themselves. I tell parents, you really want to embrace your role as your child's home-based case manager, because that is often the role. And then finally, parents are, because the special education regulations and best practice requires consent from parents, they have a lot of decisions to make. What we know from research, whether kids have disabilities or not, is that the more engaged families are, the better the outcomes are for students. So this, our work, we hope, really does support Arlington's family and community engagement practices and policies. So, one of the things when we're meeting with families, after I, introduce them to their new role as their child's case manager, on top of being the nurse and the chef and the nurturer and the, the breadwinner in the family, we always tell them you're not alone. There's a lot of support, and the Parent Resource Center is just one place that families can come to get support. And we do that kind of in 4 primary ways that I will take another moment or two to tell you about. First, we offer individual consultations. So, I could look through my list of parents that I've talked to today. One was a parent of a child whose pediatrician said his gross motor and fine motor skills seem a little delayed and we're worried about language. What should I do? So with that family, I immediately wrote to them and said, we'd be glad to talk to you, because the more families know going into these meetings, the better the questions they ask, the better they're able to manage the meeting, because one of the things we know is this is an emotional process for parents. They are worried, so sometimes emotionally compromised at meetings, and there's a lot of just logistical details that are required to be discussed. So if we can kind of work with families and help them know this is what this meeting's about, these are the possible decisions and outcomes that might take place or transpire, this is your role, and these are, let's talk about some questions you might want to ask and some information you might want to share. So we work with families throughout the process. We work with families who maybe are worried that their child isn't getting maybe the exact correct support that they might need to be making good progress, or they feel as though maybe their child was not found eligible and should be. So whether it's troubleshooting, just information sharing, or wanting to connect with other parents of kids, say with autism or with Down syndrome, we're happy to meet individually and talk with families in a safe and confidential space. Even though we're part of the school district, we really work hard to know that, or to make sure that families know that they can come to us. We are not making decisions about their child. We're not talking with the schools unless a parent explicitly asks us to do that. My assistant and I met with a mom who spoke Spanish the other night, and this parent really felt as though her child's learning condition really hadn't been adequately explained. She was concerned about her child's progress, and she very much wanted us to be able to reach out, and support her. So I was able to call the coordinator and talk about the parents' concerns and really, ask some questions about, the IEP and what some next steps might be. So we do, we're not advocates per se. Our goal is to build in parents the advocacy skills that they need to be effective team members. But sometimes it is helpful to have somebody else kind of who knows people and knows how to operate within the system to help families navigate this. School and community connections. We are grateful to be able to offer support to families, but we also know we're just one of many amazing supports here in Arlington. We are very fortunate to have a special ed PTA, which kind of functions like a regular school PTA, but it's for the whole district, and it's just for families of, well, not just for, but it focuses and includes families of students who have disabilities. Because, you know, we know some disabilities are a little bit more what we call low incidence. You know, you might only have, you know, one child with deafness at an elementary school, but there are 7 others at the same grade. So this is a way for families to connect. And they do a lot of training, they do teacher mini grants, and they do a lot, you have great grassroots listserv. We also have a special education advisory committee that is designed to identify unmet needs within the school district and provide recommendations and advice to the school board. And then there's a number of other groups here that I've listed. I think almost any concern that a family might have, we have a group for that. NAMI does an amazing job offering mental health support or support to families living with somebody with mental illness or mental health concerns. They meet at least twice a month, I think, on Sunday evenings. So, you know, if we have a parent who's calling, worrying about a child's mental health, we're able to give them our school and community resources, but also say there's a great group of parents, let's connect you up with them. So we do a lot of those types of connections with ADHD groups, with groups worried about reading, with groups worried about autism. So there's a lot of opportunities. The other thing we do with families is help them connect with private providers. So sometimes a parent might be looking for a counselor in the community or a private speech therapist or private therapist for occupational therapy. And although we can't recommend or endorse private providers, we do maintain lists of practitioners that have helped families, that families share with us or colleagues share with us. We also offer a lot of parent learning sessions. We typically offer between, I'd say, 3 and 5 events each month. So for example, on, was it just last night, Monday night or Tuesday night, Ann Dolan came to talk about executive functioning skills with children. We are getting ready to launch a session next Tuesday on anxiety and worry in children. We're bringing in a speaker from the National Institute of Mental Health. We'll be offering a class on kind of an overview of special education. So up here on the screen are lists of some of the things we do almost every year. Last year, we did a lot virtually. And one of the exciting things we were able to begin to do last year virtually was to increase our language accessibility. There's some amazing technology tools. It's not perfect, but with our assistant, we've been able to have, a presentation like this one. On a week ago Tuesday, we worked with our advisory committee and they were holding the meeting like this, but I was able to take their slides, pull them up, and we'd had a request for Amharic translation. So we were able to generate Amharic subtitles in real time on the screen while my assistant was here with me, and she was working with families who speak Spanish to use Microsoft Translator to get subtitles and audio in Spanish. So we're very excited about the kind of technology language capacity that virtual learning has provided, and we are looking forward to hopefully continuing those practices this year. And then we also have a lending library here. You can see a picture of our bookshelves. And one of the things we did during the pandemic was really try to shore up our online tools and resources, and we're continuing to develop those all the time. We have also a resource guide online for families in English and Spanish on, kind of every step of the special ed process and what they need to know. And then we send weekly e-newsletters. So we also, through our weekly newsletters, are able to share information about our events, but also, like Lynn will frequently send us information about the great work happening at DHS. So we push that out to our families, to subscribers. We also work closely with Lynn's office and SCAN of Northern Virginia to sponsor a family engagement network to support the needs of all of our families in Arlington. So to keep up to date with the PRC and what's happening, you are welcome to subscribe. You can send me an email at prc@apsva.us, or you can snap a little shot of that QR code and you will then start getting messages that you can hopefully disseminate to your networks. And you can visit us here at our website, apsva.us/PRC. We would love to connect with you. We would love to hear from you what you view as needs in the community. And again, our main focus is supporting families of kids with disabilities, but we also welcome any and all family to access our supports and services.
Oh, what a wealth of information there, Kathleen. Thank you. I do want to point our attention to the great question that Rick posed in the chat here.
Okay.
Rick, do you want to voice your question, your comment and question?
Yeah, right. There are two sort of things that I'm thinking about that I'm wondering, you probably are experts in this. A lot of this idea of the parent being the home-based case manager really is so important. It follows the child throughout the life. They never get another job. They never transfer to another department. But a lot of times, especially in the court system, we have parents who are, that they're resistant. They don't really want to take it on. It feels overwhelming, or maybe they're passive. And we struggle sometimes. How do we get these parents to engage more? Well, in many ways, the parents feel disempowered. And in many of the parents, they have their own sort of issues they're struggling with. And then another side of that same question is there are parents really who come from places where, other people are in charge and making the decisions, and they'll sit in IEP meetings or different meetings. They have no idea what's going on. And, they're not even used to thinking in terms of, I've got to be driving this. What thoughts do you have about effective strategies to work with them?
I have a lot of thoughts about that. And I think, in Arlington, we embrace what we call a dual capacity framework, where family engagement can happen by giving families information and support, but also by giving our staff information and support. So I'm working a lot with our family and community engagement specialist and trying to use the practices that have been identified to make sure that we are inviting and soliciting family support. So for example, when I'm working with, like a few years ago, I just kind of created one, an input for families to send in their ideas about, let's say, that IEP, which is that individual education program. Those meetings happen every year. And I agree, Rick, I think unfortunately for a lot of families, they're invited to a meeting, people put papers in front of them, they start talking through, there's a lot of people in and out, and I think many families just feel like their job as the parent is just to sign on the dotted line at the end of the meeting. So we really work with families. We're like, here's a form. How about, let's talk about, what do you see as your child's strengths? What do you see as your child's needs? What are your family's priorities? Like, and I was really listening to Kristen, like, what is it that you'd like to see your child do? What are your hopes and dreams for your child? Let's write that down. And like, I don't write it down for them. I encourage them to do it. I'm like, so let's make sure that you send this in to the team a week or two before the meeting. So if I'm the teacher, before I even start drafting that IEP, I'm already collaborating with that family.
Yeah.
And for families that are a little bit less comfortable, I think giving a format. And my former colleague and I went around to all of our schools and met with all of our special ed teachers, and we showed them this form, like, you might get some of these. And they're like, oh, this is great. Can we send this home? And, we're like, yes, please do. So I think we have a lot of work to do on ensuring that we are not just kind of in the middle of a meeting saying, do you have any questions, but really structuring opportunities for input, preferably before a meeting, by sending home a form or making a phone call, or thinking as a team, who can be kind of that parent's ally in the meeting and say, well, when you and I were talking during parent-teacher conferences, I remember you were a little bit worried about your child's math skills, or you mentioned that your child seems really shy and doesn't have any friends. Let's talk more about that. So, I mean, I think, we have to ensure that parents understand that they are legally, required members. We talk with families a lot about just participating increases your child's opportunities for success. I think most families want that. And if they know that research tells us, like we tell them, like research tells us the more involved you are, the better your child's going to do in school. And also, like, I'm excited. We just got for the first time ever, we have our PRC contact cards, not just in English and Spanish, but in Amharic and Mongolian and Arabic. And we're going to try to also look for opportunities. We have parent liaisons in each building, because one thing we know is, I think when any of us are dealing with a challenging situation or something we're worried about, we talk to our friends. So if parents can spread the word hopefully that empowers families to feel more comfortable, like, oh, my friend has gone through this too, and they have some suggestions for me. So we're really hoping to get the word out about what, for families that are coming from other places where maybe their role was not to be decision makers, we want them to know that's okay. So I think it's, providing information on both ends.
Wonderful. Those are wonderful steps that you're taking to kind of really redistribute the power, in the room, in the meeting room, for example, and really empowering the parents. I know that in the FAP meeting process, we are thinking about, well, the parents shouldn't come into the room where everybody else is already in the room. We should come in together, for example, and the parent can choose the seat as opposed to, it's a designated seat. And I think little steps like that can really help mitigate the power differential. And that's part of, it's not, what we do, but how we do it, how we proceed the process is also important. I see Ann O'Brien's hand up. Please jump in.
Hi, this is all great information. It's fascinating. I'm just curious, and you might not be the right person to ask on this, but as we think about issues of disproportionality in special education, how that fits into the work that you do with parents or do with, with staff in the school building or other stakeholders, and just really kind of what the context in Arlington is regarding that issue.
Well, I'm honestly, and I think like many of my colleagues who have been in the district for a long time, I'm disappointed with the pace at which we're making progress on addressing those types of issues. I think we're very, very fortunate. We have two really, truly visionary special education directors. We have all known about these numbers and the inequities that have existed, and just the opportunity gaps, achievement gaps, that they used to be called achievement gaps. We know that our certain sets of students are more likely to be found eligible. They're more likely, if they're found eligible, to be educated in a more restrictive environment. So one of the things that we're doing as part of the Office of Special Education is really trying to have consistent practices across schools and making sure that guidelines are set up to be the same regardless of what school, and that we're also ensuring that we're looking frequently at a child's progress. I have worked with Dr. Kelly Krug, who's our current elementary director, and she's very focused on making sure that everybody has the tools and information they need to ensure that every child gets the interventions that they need when they need them, so that we're not waiting for kids to fail, that we are stepping in. So I think within the Office of Special Education are trying really hard to be part of the solution. We have newly formed, departments of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And, I think for some of our kids, our families of kids with disabilities, regardless of their racial, cultural, ethnic backgrounds, just by, the essence of having a student with a disability are considered, people with disabilities are considered, part of our efforts of inclusion and inclusivity. So we're working constantly. We're spent a lot of time this week planning for augmentative and alternative communication week to really highlight for our users who maybe can't speak that they still have a voice, that whether they're using picture symbols or whether they are using devices, we're going to have a whole series of workshops to be done to ensure that we are trying to contribute to an inclusive school district. We sponsored last year virtually a couple of conversations about talking with kids about race that we offered with two of our school psychologists who report to Laura Newton, did an amazing job, actually 3 of them. So I think, part of our work is just staying familiar with these issues, working closely with our family and community engagement specialists. One of the things I'll be glad to come back and share with you in November, we've been working on a telenovela in Spanish that follows a family through the process. And we purposefully tried to highlight some of these issues about you don't have to agree. Like one of the titles is called It's Okay to Disagree. So that's a little bit of the work we're doing. We have a lot of work to do, I think, as a district. I'm really happy to be part of it. I hope that by the time I retire, those numbers look better than they've looked. So we have a lot of work to do, and it's an important and good question, Ian. Thanks for asking.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'm aware of our time and we're pushing over time here. So I want to quickly, thank both Christine and Kathleen. And this could not have been a more perfect first, conversation on this. I think the content of what you presented and your work just are seamless, in terms of your presentation. You can see the overlapping, so there's no gap in services. It's almost, I envision like your two pieces of adjacent pieces of a puzzle. And it just fits so well. And I really appreciate you giving us a plug with the Project Family program and Strengthening Families program as well. But I want to turn it to Megan to kind of wrap us up for today. But like I said earlier, it is an open invitation for both of you to please come back with us in October as we continue this conversation and begin to kind of brainstorm more what else is out there, what's missing, so that we come out and find more clarity in terms of where can the partnership fit in this age bracket of services. Thank you. Megan?
Hey there, and so I hope I don't break up too much wrapping up. Thank you so much again, Kathleen and Kristen. That was really wonderful presentations and to hear about the resources. And it did spark a lot of thinking about what the gaps might be. So in October, what we're planning on is to continue this conversation with an opportunity that we had hoped to kick off tonight, but because of the rich discussion and question and answer tonight, we're not going to start that tonight. But to start a brainstorming session to think through from the knowledge in the room, what kind of resources Arlington has and how we can be helpful in extending the reach of the resources we have or think about resources we don't have. So that's going to be the brainstorming part of our October meeting. Simultaneously in breakout rooms, we're going to manage the conversations that we previewed by inviting folks to do the doodle poll, some meetings on organizational structure that Katie Crystal has agreed to undertake with the members of our partnership. And so that's a really exciting opportunity. Sally, big thanks to her, worked tirelessly to set up one-on-one meetings. And every time she had everything squared away, Katie's schedule would change. So that was really challenging. And so big thanks to Sally for trying to make it work. So what we're going to be doing is separate breakout sessions for groups, smaller groups, but and then meanwhile to have a bigger group brainstorm to really start thinking through what we can do as a partnership and where we can use our strengths to contribute to helping kids before they even get into our school system in Arlington. And I also want to give another plug, as Lynn already did, for the planning and development meeting. That one is every other, no, sorry, I'm not even going to try to say, but the invite is for everybody. You don't have to be on a committee. Like all of our meetings, you can drop in. And youth mental health and wellness, I believe, was postponed from this week to next week. So you should have gotten an email about that schedule change from Sally. And I think that's everything I had on my list. Are there last announcements or?
I have an announcement I'd like to make. The gang prevention task force is returning to the soccer fields. We've had bi-yearly soccer tournaments where we get kids, kids from mostly ESL classes, but any kid can be there. Boys, girls, and other gender expressions are welcome to join. It's going to be Saturday, October 9th from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. It'll be completely outdoors at Virginia Highlands Park. The theme is Take One for the Team, and there'll be free opportunities for COVID vaccines. In any case, I'm going to send it, I'll send an announcement to Lynn and also have you share it with your networks. This is something it's for high school, middle and high school age kids. We've had really great turnout and it's a great community event. So of course the partnership is welcome. Well, the partnership has partnered with us many times in the past. So it'll be a great event.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments? Judy, it looked like you were about to say something. Were you reaching? Okay.
Just saying thanks.
Okay. Well, if I may very quickly just toot the prevention horn a little bit. As you know, September is Suicide Prevention Month, and we are trying to be out in the community with direct contact, at tabling events to raise awareness on importance of mental health and importance of suicide awareness. And this morning, 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. So it's been 12 hours and I'm still high on this because it was a phenomenal table that we had. Michael Swisher and I were at the Trade Center. So we were in the parking garage at the Trade Center with a table, and we met more than 100 folks, more than 100 that came to the table and talked about suicide prevention and mental health. And we gave out all kinds of swags. We gave out nice water bottles that connects to SPAN. We gave out, our resources. We gave the resource guide to this group. We gave out gun locks. So we had a total of more than 35 gun locks that were, picked up and by folks who are gun owners that are agreeing to safely storing the guns in the home. We gave out about, 30 medication lock boxes and also medication deactivation pouches. So it was a phenomenal event, and I'm sorry to be selfish in sharing that, but it was great.
Great.
Thank you.
That's so great to hear. And that's a great note to wrap up on. I think we
Yes.
conclude for the day and
All
look
right.
forward to seeing everybody next time.
Thank you all. See you
Thanks
in
so
October.
much. Thanks, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See y'all later.